Let's go to our next guest. Delighted to say he's joining us in the studio, Lord David Frost, a Conservative peer, of course, former Cabinet Office Minister in Boris Johnson's government and our former chief Brexit negotiator. Oh, simpler, happier times, David.
Those are the days.
Happier times.
Yeah.
Hold on, let's talk about the EU. Let's talk about, the migrant boats. We were taking back control back in 2016, weren't we? And then we actually had the Brexit negotiation and we were going to control our borders, decide who came to live here legally. I think we all thought illegally too. The revelation today, 20,000 migrants have come over here on boats. Revelations last week where we had, off the scale numbers, 9 out of 10 of them admittedly not from the EU, coming to this country. 1 million people a year arriving in this country to live and work here. What do you make of our taking back control? How's that working for us?
Well, on immigration, we've had control, but we haven't used it very well. And I thought Rob Jenrick the other day saying last week's figures were a day of shame for the Conservative Party hit it just right. We absolutely did not listen, and we got that absolutely wrong. The small boats now, the 20,000 who've arrived since Keir Starmer came to power, what do you expect? He's scrapped the only scheme that was going to deter them. He's got a load of fantasy ideas about paying practically every country across Europe and the Middle East to stop them coming, and they are still coming. So,
we've been paying France $500 million a year, $500 million a year.
$500 million a year. We're outsourcing control. We need to take back control of our borders, and it's going to involve leaving the ECHR and all of that.
Well, that's and Kemi Badenoch, I know you were backing, as Sam Armstrong was as well, you were backing Robert Jenrick. You had quite a lot of praise from Nigel Farage on the show about half an hour ago. I think he said he was sort of, a tribute act. I think he didn't say mini-me quite exactly, but even Kemi Badenoch last week, in her first big policy speech as Tory leader, was talking about, even leaving the European Convention on Human Rights may not be the most radical thing to do. But you worked with many of the quite senior figures in the French government now. Michel Barnier is now the Prime Minister of France, although perhaps not for much longer. He can't pass his budget this week. He may well be out in his ear again after a very short stint in Macron's government. But you worked with him. You dealt with him. You jousted with him over Brexit. What is the thinking, particularly in France, and in Brussels, I suppose, as well, but particularly in France, about why they will not do enough to stop these boats leaving the French coast? Is it just sort of bloody-mindedness and punishing us for Brexit? Is it they just don't care? Or is it they're quite happy to see these people leave their shores? What's the thought process?
I think it's a mix of all those things, to be honest. They do some controls. If one's going to be fair, there will be even more coming if the French did nothing at all. But
they do patrol the coast.
They do, and some are stopped coming, but obviously more are not. And I think it's convenient for France to have people leave the country. It solves part of the problem, and I think there still is an element of, as you say, just bloody-mindedness. They have no real interest in making things particularly easy for us on that subject, so you can't expect them to put a huge amount of effort into
What would Britain have to do? Because Keir Starmer's shtick before the election, and he's carrying it on now, is very much that, if only we just sit down and have a decent conversation and be civil with the French and people in Brussels, then they would help us with it. And it's been failures of the Tory governments and numerous leaders, Boris Johnson onwards, to actually, do a proper negotiation and have a grown-up, civilised conversation with them. You're shaking your head. Is that the answer?
It's the mentality that got us under Theresa May into the mess on Brexit, which is, if you are nice, if you give the other side what they want, if you empathise with them, it'll all work out right. And that's not how international politics works. I'm not saying you should be deliberately aggressive and difficult, but you've got to say what your own interests are and stick to them.
When you're working for Boris Johnson as a trade negotiator, was he? He's actually rather friendly and charming. He's rather good at charming people in these sort of meetings, isn't he?
He's charming personally and really good at striking up relationships with people, but he was absolutely hard on the core of Brexit policy, and that's why we got it done so successfully in those couple of years.
Do you still think it's a success? Lots of people, we're told, are unhappy. Now, I still think it's the best thing that Britain's done in probably decades or possibly centuries for our sovereignty. But do you still think it's a success, and what would you do differently?
Well, I do think it's a success. I mean, to say that a country like ours can't govern itself, we've governed ourselves for 1,000 years perfectly successfully. We can carry on doing it again now. We've just got to get used to the idea. And unfortunately, a lot of our establishment kind of forgot how to run the country during the period of EU membership. And we're now seeing all that sort of play out. So absolutely, it's been a success. The fact we're still arguing about the economics shows that leaving doesn't even show up in the numbers, really. What we failed to do is take control of the borders properly and do domestic reforms to get the growth rates up. And unfortunately, we did all that so badly that Labour are now in power. And we've got to wait another 5 years, I guess, before we get another go, if ever.
Well, we're only waiting a couple more months for Donald Trump to enter the US White House, obviously. Now, there was a lot of talk about how, we could get a trade deal. I remember Obama said we were back of the queue if we left the EU. A lot of hope. But it didn't happen under Trump first time around, and that was with, Boris Johnson in power. OK, we had the small matter of lockdowns and COVID. It may have got in the middle. People were busy with other things. But what is the likelihood of us getting any sort of A, a US trade deal at all, and B, of us escaping the threats of and the reality of trade tariffs from a US administration run by Donald Trump, who seems to think that tariffs are the answer to everything, or at least the threat of them is? Yeah,
I think we will have a good chance of getting an FTA, a free trade agreement, with the Americans if we show we're serious about it on our side. The Trump team have been putting out signals, it seems, on this subject, and if they are serious about putting on tariffs, we've got to try and get under those. Of course, we've got to stop being silly ourselves about our sort of obsession with things like chlorinated chicken and hormone beef.
I mean, everyone I know who goes to the States happily says, "Oh, I had some great chicken wings." Yeah. What kind of chicken did you? I mean, it's become one of those sort of talismanic things where the meaning has kind of been lost. It's just one of those things. So we've got to get over that. And I have a funny feeling that British farmers who are already reeling from the inheritance tax whammy, that they're not going to be able to get over that. There's lots of talk that possibility for a trade deal will be absolutely off the cards because that's the ability to actually send US chicken to the UK, which they're not able to do right now, would actually be a deal breaker. So, I mean, if we choose to behave like that, then it will be a deal breaker. But I think the solution for our farmers is not to protect them, but it's to free them from the bureaucracy, allow them to do what they do best, which is grow food, and then they'll be as successful as anywhere else. As long as we protect, we won't have the high quality and cheap food that we should expect. And I just want to coming back to the linking to the migration issue we were discussing earlier about talking about the illegal migrants but also legal migrants. There's a documentary on Channel 4 tonight by Fraser Nelson, the former editor of The Spectator, exposing. I mean, I'm amazed there's still stuff that can be exposed on this. The sheer scale of the benefits crisis in this country. And one of the things we've learned is that Grimsby, more than half of working age adults, 53%, are on benefits. Not claiming a little bit of housing benefit help, but on benefits. That's what they live on. They don't work at all. About a third of the people in Grimsby are claiming sickness benefit. But also we now know that sickness benefits are worth more than minimum wage jobs for many families, depending on what you can qualify for. But you can get £3,000 more a year for being on the sick, but also how people can qualify for it. And basically there are financial incentives for those who are working at the benefits office to effectively sign people off for sick. Yeah, lovely job, you get more money, don't have to worry you. And they actually get paid more for doing a quick assessment and getting that off the books. We have set up an entire, almost industrial system encouraging people not to work. Yeah. It's absolute madness, and of course people who are genuinely sick need to be decently supported. Nobody would argue with that. We could do that better if we had more money. Well, quite, and the incentives matter. If you push up what you get for not working, then you've got to expect that more people will try and use that route. Is there a problem? And I don't think this is even just among Labour politicians. I think this is among lots of Tories and certainly Lib Dems as well. This rather patronising, but nobody would want to live like this. Of course they wouldn't. Everyone wants to work, and a very sort of patronising view. Whereas actually, if you've got back-breaking work on minimum wage, with a cruddy boss and a long trudge to the bus stop in the rain to get there, Of course it would make sense for people to make the rational choice to have a nice lie-in and stay in the warmth drinking a cup of tea for the same money, or if not more money. Is there an issue within government, both civil service and the politicians, that they are so out of touch with a lot of people in this
I think
country?
they are really out of touch, and I'm probably a bit out of touch myself, let's be honest.
You didn't inherit it.
I didn't know. If you talk to people from these areas, they themselves know that some people are kind of abusing the system and other people are not, and it's quite obvious. I think part of the problem is that mostly politicians, civil servants, people in government aren't themselves particularly motivated by money. They're in it for other reasons.
Well, they get other things from their jobs.
They don't really understand other people can be, and that financial incentives do make a difference to how you behave. And if you get more for not working than for working, then some people are going to do that.
I know a lot of people who love their jobs who would still take that deal if that was the option. Do you have any hope at all that this country is going to improve over the coming years? Because so many people are concerned about particularly public services, which are in absolutely dire straits, and they actually impact people, again, people who can't buy their way into private healthcare or private schools or escape public transport. That so many people who need winter fuel allowance to feed the meter during the winter months. Do you have any hope that Labour are going to get to grips with any of this stuff, and that the Tories, the party of which you are a peer, have their own answers?
Well, I certainly don't think Labour are going to get to grips with it. They're just doubling down on all the mistakes that have been made over the last couple of decades and doing it worse. I think this country, and actually most European countries, are essentially, a lot of the way the country works is broken. The state doesn't work. Most of the public services don't work. We've got insane energy policies. We don't control our borders. We've got these sort of super high taxes, spend, benefits, pensions, whatever.
Happy Monday, everyone.
It is going to take a really serious effort to get on top of that. It isn't just tinkering. It's going to require a real plan. And Keir Starmer's plan this week, it's like General Secretary Brezhnev with his tractor planning. It's going to make no difference.
Pig iron production up 340%.
No difference at all.
I fear, alas, this is the case. Now, Sam, I'm sure you're with the same party, obviously.
Yes.
And you'll probably find yourself in agreement a lot of the time with what Lord Frost has said. Mind you and I normally agree on more than we do today on the Greg Wallace issue. Do you think there's any hope? Because we have some really serious issues that need to be dealt with.
I don't, actually. It's the sad truth. I think so far politicians have showed themselves to be particularly adept at kicking down the road the consequences of the decisions they are taking. And we've seen on welfare, we've got 500,000 more people claiming sickness benefit, most of whom are for so-called mental health conditions, some legitimate, some not so legitimate, but in every case I suspect they'd probably actually be better off working. And how are we funding that? Well, we're funding that by replacing those who were doing those jobs with cheap labour from overseas. Now, we could have chosen to spend that money on improving conditions for British workers at the very bottom of the market. We could have done that. Instead, what we've done is we've chosen to pay vastly more money to put all of those people out of the workforce, to import those over into this country, where in actual fact OBR analysis proves that every single one of those people will end up costing us at least £500,000 over their lifetimes, and this broken cycle is going to continue. So far, with the exception of a few Conservative politicians and Reform, there does not seem to be
wake up.
Any sense that we're going to break this cosy consensus.
I know. We've got a lot of nodding in this studio, I imagine, around the radio and the TV as well today. Very much indeed. Sam, more from you coming up. Lord David Frost, always a pleasure to have you in the studio. Thank you very much.